Hi, I'm Bob, known in my other do-it-yourself videos as Bob the Builder. This video will show you how to address two problems typical of the John Deere x304 garden tractor and other John Deere Series 300 tractors. There are other similar videos on these two problems, but they don't make clear, for me at least, their applicability to John Deere's x304 garden tractor. One of the problems is black exhaust smoke, loss of power, and frequent stalling. The other problem is transmission slipping or unresponsive forward and reverse pedals. Other videos address these two problems without removing the rear chassis. I found it was far simpler to address either of these two problems by removing the rear chassis first. If you know how to remove the rear chassis, the rest of the repairs are far easier. The most likely cause of black exhaust smoke is stale or foul gas. Unfortunately, that was the last thing I tried because I didn't know how to remove the rear chassis to get to remove and drain the gas tank. I tried changing the spark plugs, adjusting the carburetor, even replacing the carburetor entirely, replacing the fuel pump, replacing the spark coils, and adjusting the exhaust valve gap. None of that worked. Finally, I figured out how to remove the rear chassis and drain the gas tank. Problem solved. Take my advice. The most likely cause is bad gas, so replace it. I'm going to show you how easy it is to remove the rear chassis to do so. If your transmission is slipping or your forward and reverse pedals are unresponsive, the most likely causes are a worn drive belt, idler pulley needs adjustment, loose or stripped transmission belt pulley, low transmission fluid, or a combination of these. All of these parts are difficult to replace unless you remove the rear chassis and gas tank. If you do so, you won't need a hoist. Just remove the lower mower deck, as shown in your owner's manual, and then use a floor jack to raise the mower and put cement blocks and chocks under each wheel. At the end of this video, I've included the parts numbers for the drive belt, the plastic idler pulley, and the transmission pulley. If you replace one of these parts, you might as well replace all of them and top off the transmission fluid as well. For both of these repairs, I'm going to show you how easy it is to remove the rear chassis. Please note that my John Deere x304 garden tractor has a K46 Tough Turf transmission. This is a John Deere x304 I bought it in 2009. I had to replace the front hood and fender, which is all one piece, so the decal that would normally be on there that would say X304 is not on there. But believe me, it is an X304. You have to, of course, take the seat off, but that should be pretty self-explanatory. You just take out all the bolts. That isn't a big deal. But what isn't so self-explanatory is that you need to take off these two forward and reverse pedals, which is not a big deal. And then there are some bolts from the underside holding the rear part of the chassis, this part here. Now you notice that I have put the deck height in the lowest level that I could, and then I lowered it all the way down to the floor. And that'll give me just a little bit more room to work on the pedals and the nuts. And I'm going to show you where those 4 bolts are in a second. Okay, now as I said, after you take the seat off, and I'll show you that in a minute, but I want to show you the 4 bolts you need to remove in order to take the back of the chassis off. There's one right here on either side of the seat. And then there's one right underneath this foot panel right here. And there's one on the other side right over here. So you take off the pedals first, the forward and reverse pedals, and then take out those 4 nuts. Of course, you also got to take the seat off. Big deal. Now, in order to get to the bolts holding the seat down, you've got to take these 2 springs and get them out of the way. You just turn them like this and they'll go forward. Like that. And they're the 2 nuts that you got to take off. And then, of course, there are the 2 in the front here. Don't forget, you got to take this thing out, which can be a bummer, and I'll show you how to do that in a sec too. You might not have to take off the seat, but this chassis is very awkward when you lift it off, and taking the seat off makes it a lot easier. By the way, when you take the seat off, don't forget to take this wire out right here. It's pretty self-explanatory, but there's a little clip right here and holds it together, and then you can just pull it out. Piece of cake. 2 things I want to point out to you. First off, I got lucky. The last time that I had to remove this thing, it was a real bear. I had to take the lower deck off in order to get to these 2 washers, which slip, and you have to raise them up in order to pull it out. So that was real luck that I didn't have to do it this time, because I guess I didn't fasten them in tight enough when I took it apart the last time. The other thing that I wanted to show you is in the back here. Believe me, this is an X304. You notice that I put a 2-inch ball on the back so I could tow some other attachments. And I also put this square plate on the back. Looks like it's a little white at this point. And that was so that I could attach a leaf and mulch bagger. But that shouldn't interfere with what we're doing now. Don't forget, before you try and lift the rear chassis off, to take the gas tank cap off. You can see here I've disconnected the gas line, and I would carefully threaded through the seat shut-off safety line, and they're just resting on top of the tank. One thing that I didn't like, what I saw under here, was that the belt for the belt for the transmission is kind of worn, and so while I got this sucker apart, I'm going to replace that belt, which is not so easy, but we'll take it step by step. And oh yeah, while I have the chassis removed, I want to show you this thing right here. This thing. In order to get off the seat, the height adjustment knob, you gotta pull these washers up, and it's a bummer to do that. You have to take off the deck, and there's a separate video on how to do that from John Deere. As it turns out, in order to get the gas tank out, you got to take off this brace right here, and that happens to have an 18 millimeter socket is what you need to do that. Once you get the gas tank out of the way, you got to remove the tension rod, the tension spring right here. Just pull back on that. And then that'll relieve the tension on this belt. And then you use, got to take off this clip right here. And I think you got the tool to know how to do that. So here's the tool to remove the snap ring. You just squeeze on it like that, and then the snap ring just pulls right off. Okay, so here's the problem. Why when I pressed on the pedal, it wouldn't go. You see this thing? it's freewheeling. Doesn't even catch on there. That's because these little tits right here. The other guy's got videos on that. But I need a new pulley. Not a big deal. But that should solve the problem. Now in my case, you can see that the grooves on the shaft itself are not worn. It's the grooves in the pulley which are messed up. So, just like the other guys have showed you, I got to order a new one of these, and there's the serial number for you. Now, what the other guys didn't show you in their video is how to take off the chassis in order to get to this thing and make it real simple. More in a few minutes. Be careful after you take the fan off, because you got this little spring washer here. You can see it's not flat. It's not supposed to be flat. It's supposed to hold that fan up snug to the pulley. And don't lose this thing. I'm going to put it over here in a box separately. Okay, now, as I showed you before, this belt is really worn, so I might as well replace it when I replace the pulley. You see all of these little cracks in it here. It's pretty terrible. But getting this thing out could be a bugger, and as I do it, I'll show you some tips. Now, as you get into this job, you're going to see there is no possible way to get out the belt without removing the two idler pulleys underneath and these two tie rods, steering tie rods. One of them's you got to remove this tie rod here and the other one on the other side. So you take them out like this, and then the belt will come out, but you also have to remove these two pulleys. And as most people quickly discover, these little pulleys are not very good, and they are worn. I'll show you when I get it out. Got to replace those two. In case you didn't catch it earlier, here are the two nuts you need to remove to disconnect the steering arms. I found it much easier to disconnect the arms at this end rather than where they're attached at the wheel end, because disconnecting them here makes removing and installing the transmission drive belt much easier. Here's one of the two idler pulleys from the drive belt. And as you can see here, this thing is plastic and it's worn through, which who knows why, but anyway, it's a piece of junk. And I have to order a new one of those. And the other thing is the actual pulley, which goes on the transmission. I saw another video, which is why another guy posted, and you see these little teeth in here. This thing was on top of the transmission, and all these little teeth are all worn down. Now the axle shaft is not worn down because it's obviously made of a harder tempered steel, whereas this thing I think is deliberately soft so it wears out instead of having the shaft wear out. Anyway, I got these things ordered, and in a couple of days, on Amazon, by the way. You can get the part numbers. I'll post them later. Get everything on Amazon. So I ordered a new pulley. This one, I ordered a new idler pulley, and I ordered a new belt. So there you have it. Bye. You can pause this slide to get a long look at it. Since you've already gotten access to it, why not top off the transmission fluid by popping off the rubber cap shown here using a screwdriver. Additionally, once you pop off the cap, you'll see a magnet which may have some metal filings sticking to it. Lift out the magnet with a pair of needle nose pliers, wipe it off, and put it back in. The K46 Tough Turf transmission came with 10W30 John Deere motor oil rather than the more exotic Tough Tech transmission fluid or oil. Since I only anticipated topping off the transmission, I did so with John Deere 10W30 motor oil, rather than replacing it entirely with another fluid. I determined this by going to www.toughtorque.com and found the following specification sheet. You can pause this slide as well to get a long look at it. Here's spec sheet SC-1, at least the relevant part of it, which I found on toughtorque.com. Pause this slide as well to study the minimum and maximum fluid levels in a K46 Tough Torque transmission. In case you forgot to take note of how the belt is routed through the idler pulleys, pause the video here and refresh your memory. Pause this slide for a moment. Here's a list of the parts I ordered on Amazon.com. By the way, Amazon is not compensating me for plugging its website, and I strongly encourage you to determine the correct part numbers for yourself. In summary, remove the mower deck first. Second, put cement blocks and chocks under all four wheels. Then remove the rear chassis. Properly dispose of the stale gas. Rinse out the gas tank and refill it with fresh gas. Inspect all the transmission drive pulleys and V-belt. Order the parts needed after verifying the parts numbers for yourself, and of course reassemble in reverse order. Well, this is Bob the Builder saying so long until next time.